all of the games we're going to look at are going to be games you can purchase outright. They don't rely on any Nintendo Online subscriptions, so obviously there'll be certain titles which are available that aren't mentioned. I've been playing Xenoblade 3 for over 2 years at this point. I'm a good 35 to 40 hours deep, but there is something to be said for RPGs, which are one of my favourite genres, fitting into packages less than 20 hours. With that in mind, I thought of a list for the Nintendo Switch of RPGs that could do exactly that were well worth your time, so we'll start with the longest and gradually make our way towards the very shortest, but still ones that are so worth your time. If you enjoy this type of content, let me know down below. As always, we do give away a free game each and every week. I've got a couple of RPGs in my collection that I can share with you guys. So, what are the best short, in air quotes, RPGs? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. Let's start off then with Final Fantasy VII. In fairness, you are going to have to move through this one at a brisk pace to hit the 20-hour mark, but it is doable. My most recent playthrough is exactly on 20, and that is helped by some of the quality of life features, like being able to speed up battles. And you can even in these versions actually turn off certain encounters entirely. Now you take on the role of Cloud, who is an ex-soldier, a special forces unit who are said to be the most skilled of fighters, and so Cloud can charge top dollar as a mercenary. It's a group called Avalanche that have hired you, and they're fighting against a company called Shinra within the now very iconic city of Midgar. I absolutely loved the way this game started. The iconic moment where he flips off of the train at the beginning. It still holds up to this day, even if the visuals do certainly show their age. And the thing for me that kept Final Fantasy so good after all these years are the small moments. Things like the Gold Saucer, where you can go and take part in mini games. It's like a fun fair that's, I believe, floating in the sky if I remember correctly. And the different side characters that join your team, but then with flashes of inspiration, like maybe small references to things like Akira with his motorbike, and you'll find yourself actually taking control of that at one point. But the soundtrack here is exceptional. I often use some of it in these sales videos. If you remember Red X's theme, it's that type of music that companies find so difficult to recreate these days, but which feels fresh every single time you hear it. In a world of remakes and re-releases, there is obviously a more modern version of Final Fantasy VII, but for me, the original just really does still hold a special place. And I do think you should check it out. It usually does go on sale. That one still to this day holds a Metacritic score of 92%. Once again, a massive thanks to Factor75 for sponsoring this episode. You might have seen in my recent community post that I've been away camping, and I've got to be honest, you don't exactly eat the healthiest food while you're off. So it is nice to get back to this. The aim of Factor is to make it so that you can eat stress-free. They're ready to eat meals, everything's fresh, it's not frozen, and also it's dietitian approved. Oh, and it takes about 2 minutes to get ready. Factor have also introduced quite a few snack options as well, things like breakfasts, smoothies, juices, fruit bites, so there's always something that should fit into your schedule. So if like me you don't enjoy prepping food, this reduces and removes that hassle, makes it easier to cook as well as clean up. All you have to do is heat it up. If that interests you, you can get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders using my link. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. Once again, a big thanks to them for sponsoring this episode. They've done so for a number of months now, and a load of you have been enjoying it, so nice one. Next up, we've got Sea of Stars from Sabotage Studios, who recently announced a new DLC that's coming soon. But the base game, if you're again moving at a brisk pace and not looking at all the extra content, you can do that in around 20, maybe 21 hours. And this took heavy inspiration from the Chrono series, even featuring some of the musical talents that were involved in those games. Now, on the one hand, this looks absolutely beautiful, but it perhaps doesn't have quite the depth of writing of some of the other titles that we'll look at on this list. Personally, I quite liked the lighter tone to proceedings, but some people felt that it was a little bit too light. With that said though, the actual storyline itself and the base mechanics, some of the combat decisions, it makes for an excellent RPG and a world that you actually want to be in. It centers on a couple of kids who are known as the Children of the Solstice. They have the powers of the sun and the moon and can perform what's known as eclipse magic. I think one of my favourite aspects of this one is the traversal. There's an early scene where you're like making your way down these waterfalls and it just looks unbelievably good. Say what you will about pixel art, there's still something to be said for different styles of the way that you can present that, and it can still feel completely unique. This one features things like cooking, sailing, fishing, and obviously with that DLC just around the corner, a great time to consider it. As I say, at a brisk pace, avoiding some of the side content, you're looking at about 20 hours. If you're going to do absolutely everything, then you can easily push that to 35-40. Trials of Mana is a nice short and sweet RPG at around 18 to 20 hours, and another from the legendary Square Enix. This was actually one of our very first invitations to go to a head office. So we went to Square's office and they had like a giant Buster sword. We were like two kids in a candy store, honestly, walking around there. Shout out to Rhea. But we got to preview the game early and then obviously review it early. And it was so cool to see some of the ways they'd implemented certain things, like being able to select different characters from the beginning would actually change the way the game started, and you'd experience their backstories. And then the characters you did choose would have different synergies between them. Now, it's a re-release, or a remake I should say, of the classic RPG from 1995's Seiken Densetsu 3. But your characters had these base classes that you could gradually expand at certain key moments in the story, almost transforming them into a different class entirely, such as from the Knight into the Gladiator, and that gave it a unique feel for sure. Perhaps some of the game and the pacing was a little limited because it had to stick so closely to that original story, but still one I very much enjoyed, and it carries a Metacritic of 74, which I have to say I think is a bit low. Then we move on to an RPG that needs no real introduction on this channel. It's Disco Elysium, something completely unique in this list. It's one of the few games that I would actually class as a masterpiece, and very, very few. Like, that's probably a list of maybe 3 games of all the games I've ever played. The reason for that is the writing. It's so incredibly clever, and it uses an RPG system based around the psyche of the main protagonist. It's difficult to kind of articulate what that means. And on the face of it, it's actually quite a simple system in that certain decisions and skills or tasks that you have to carry out will rely on your ability within an area. But the layers upon layers of dialogue, the different branching choices, and the way events play out, which can be quite different, there is nothing like this game. It's kind of fitting then that we won't ever see a sequel. The dev team don't exist anymore. Essentially, half of them I believe were sacked, some of the original writers, relating to internal disputes that we'll never know about. I believe it was Robert Kurwitz, who was one of the original writers, and still works in the industry. You can only hope that he moves on to another project that essentially is a spiritual successor. It's just one of those rare games that makes you think about more than just the game you're playing. It almost holds a mirror up to the player. It's one of the most cathartic games I've ever played, so yeah, if you haven't tried this one, certainly consider it. That holds a lofty Metacritic score still of 91%. And so then we find ourselves heading towards the positively short 17-hour mark with the recently released Super Mario RPG. They did a fantastic job bringing this one back. It still maintains that same feeling almost across the board, but with a noticeable lick of paint and some polish in most areas. Now, you could actually finish this one a lot quicker, but obviously these are our review times, so 17 was where we ended up with this one. You're trying to stop a group called the Smithy Gang, and it means forging alliances between Mario, Bowser, Peach, as well as I believe a couple of original characters called Mallow and Gino. Although it's turn-based, it has that like active turn-based system where you can press a button at just the right moment to cause extra damage. I do like that, and the same can be said for the Guardian, a bit like you'd find in the Paper Mario games. Super Mario RPG holds a Metacritic score of 89%. Down at the 15-hour mark, we've got The Outer Worlds. This one comes from Obsidian, and a lot of the team that worked on the likes of Fallout New Vegas and the rest of the Fallout series. And in that regard, you will see a lot of similarities in the gameplay. While it doesn't have things like the VATS, it does have a slowdown mechanic for shooting, and the game bases itself across several planets and colonies, and does the usual of allowing you to make moral decisions about people, judge their motivations, and also the type of person you're going to be, which often puts you in the grey area. Now, what I love about The Outer Worlds is just that bonkers side. There are these weird mascots with these massive moon heads. And if you take one of them out, you can actually steal one of those and walk around with one for yourself. If you want to play stealth, you can do that. You can creep around, lockpick things. There's a bunch of DLCs as well. I've completed all of them. and I think this is a great game. Now on Switch, performance, not the best. Visuals, yeah, not great. But the gameplay still holds up nicely, and it did have loads of patches since it came out. For me it's good enough, but yeah, go check out our videos of it and see what you think. The Outer Worlds holds a Metacritic of 73%. Now before 100 Heroes we had Eiyuden Chronicles Rising, which was a prequel that introduces the world and some of the characters, and it was developed by Natsume Atari and clocks in at around about 13 to 15 hours. Now on the one hand it's quite simplistic. You arrive at this small town, you're doing various jobs for people. The combat is actually real-time action and feels a little bit like I Am Setsuna in that regard. What it did well though were to build up characters that I did actually care about. While they weren't as fleshed out as some of these other games, there's that constant drive to try and help rebuild the town after it was like devastated by an earthquake. Plus you get to meet a load of those characters, as I say, from 100 Heroes, and I would say if you're going to pick this one up then you really do want to be going on to 100 Heroes, which is an excellent RPG. Absolutely huge. It's got like 100 different characters that you can recruit, so certainly not one for this list. But Rising is still one to try out, especially if you can find it on sale, which it usually goes on. Rising holds a Metacritic score of 71%. Then we've got a real indie in Lisa the Painful. That one's around 11 hours long, and we have the pack on the Nintendo Switch, which includes both games, but these are created by Ding-a-Ling Productions. What an incredible name that is. I think it does itself justice when it describes itself as a miserable, hilarious RPG from your wildest nightmares. It's all set in this post-apocalyptic town with a main protagonist who is the biggest anti-hero, and it is so macabre with the desolation that's corrupted the world. It's also torn the moral heart out of civilization, and that is intrinsic to the story. You meet just a bunch of wrong-uns. Now why, you might ask, would you want to actually play a game like that? Well, it's a completely unique feel from anything I've played in this genre. But if you are going to play it, just go in knowing that it deals with some seriously heavy topics and a lot of taboo issues that it's amazing, really unbelievable to see on a Nintendo console. Lisa the Painful and Joyful hold a Metacritic score of 82%. We're almost down to the 10-hour mark. We're on 10.5 to 11 hours with Shadows of Adam, which was made by Something Classic Games. A very fitting name, I think, for this style. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, this one. It has some fourth wall breaking moments, and it takes place after the hero has essentially died, and then you're taking on the role of his kids. Or has he died? I shall leave that for you to find out. Now through its course I think you play as about 4 different characters in total, and its unique twist, I guess, is its strategic AP management battle system. Basically means that attack points are restored between each round, as well as through defeating the enemies. So it's almost a system of attrition that focuses on speed as well as skill. It's nice, it works well. It looks quality, it has a great soundtrack as well, a 44-track soundtrack. Another that's very memorable, and that's from Tyler Meyer. Shadows of Adam holds a Metacritic score of 75%. And so we arrive at the fabled 10-hour mark. Kicking off with Cosmic Star Heroine. I think it's fair to say that if you've been watching this channel for 5 minutes, you know I absolutely love space and sci-fi. And this one places itself across 3 separate planets, and is filled with everything you'd expect to see in those places. One aspect that I do love about this is that there's no separate battle screen. You don't move or transition into battle or combat. It takes place exactly where you are, thus saving you a bit of time. The artwork is surprisingly good. It has that lovely top-down look with hand-drawn character portraits, and while it doesn't do anything particularly unique, it's bang on the right length for me and was developed by Zeboid Games. Now, as with every single game in this list, you can push that time quite substantially if you want to go and look for all the secrets, but its unique twist here is the multi-character combos you can do within that combat that gives it a really nice sense of flow. Then in 8 hours we have the lovely surprise that was For a Vast Future. Created by Retro Games, it can usually be had for just a couple of quid on sale, and don't be put off by the art style. I think it looks great. It uses obviously just a few colours, but it still manages to have a heck of a lot of detail. You're looking at a dystopian setting, it has turn-based combat, and you're trying to stop doomsday from happening. It's set in a place called Soralia, who have experienced a devastating war, meaning that all the people that are left basically find themselves just fighting over nothing, crumbs, and you join a gang of outlaws to stop it. It's a surprisingly deep little RPG, this one. There's a crafting system in there, quite a varied range of different missions you have to go on, and spot on in terms of its length and telling a decent story in that time. At 8 hours, this one holds a Metacritic of 78%. West of Loathing was such a surprise. It's made by Asymmetric Publications, and it's a Wild West comedy stickman RPG. You very often hear people say, oh yeah, this game's really funny, that made me laugh. I would challenge anyone not to laugh out loud at this one. And it's very rare, honestly, that games actually make me laugh. You've got a massive semi-open world, loads of different quests and puzzles, many of which you can take on in an order that suits you. Some silly things like collecting random hats and stuff. There is a sequel to this one as well, but I haven't actually played that one, so I can't say how long it is. But this one had no right being as good as it was. West of Loathing is going to take you about 7.5 to 8 hours to finish, and it holds a Metacritic, well deserved, of 85%. An RPG that Glen reviewed down in the 5-hour territory is Saturday Morning RPG from Mighty Rabbit Studios. As you can probably tell from the title, it bases itself on the old Saturday morning cartoons we used to watch, with that fully 1980s feel to it, and focusing on a lot of pop culture references, things like Marty. You'll notice references to like Transformers in here, and man does it have a good soundtrack, often one of the key tenets to a good RPG in my opinion. While the visual of this one doesn't appeal to some, it's still a worthwhile experience, if a little unpolished at times. Saturday Morning RPG, that got a Metacritic of 70%. Down in the 4 to 5 hour category, we have Meg's Monster from Odin Cat. This was actually sent across to us from our friends over at PR Hound, but at the time we didn't get to play it, and man was that a mistake. This is an incredibly good game. It's set in the underworld, a land filled with different monsters and mutants who eat humans for breakfast. Two such monsters, Roy and Golan, stumble across a little lost girl called Meg, and that basically, when she starts to cry, well, the skies turn red, and I'll leave you to discover the rest. It has a very Donnie Darko feel to it. Again, post-apocalypse, but the kicker here is that you control Roy, who starts the game with 99,999 HP. He's basically invincible, and you're trying to stop Meg from actually crying, which will bring about the end of the world. So it's a really interesting mechanic when it comes to battle, protecting her, using toys to keep her pacified while taking out enemies. This is developed by quite famous Odin Cat with that, I don't even know how to describe this style. It's almost like, and I say this in a nice way, it's almost like intentionally grimy. It's an experience that you won't forget, honestly. As good as any good movie in terms of its pacing, and if story is at the heart of your favourite JRPGs, and RPGs in general, then do consider this one, even though it only takes 4.5 hours to finish. That one holds a Metacritic of 80%. Last but not least then, and yes, I know there are so many more than we could have had on this list, but we have a very fitting end. At 4 hours long, from Freebird Games to the Moon. This really does go to show how much storytelling you can fit into a small window. It centres around two doctors who have the task of basically helping patients relive their final memories, but also going all the way back to the start. It's for patients that are basically dying, and it gives them a chance to, relive their lives before they draw their last breath. Now, a very heavy topic, and one that I'm sure most of us have had to face in real life, and for that reason it has to be handled with a deft touch, and Freebird Games nail that. It doesn't come across as cheap or just doing it because, and it's just impactful. Now, this story follows their attempt to fulfill the dreams of an elderly man called Johnny as you work your way through his memories, and you're trying to piece together basically the puzzle of his life, with his last wish being to go to the moon. Outstanding game, really is. Usually again can be found for very cheap, and it holds a Metacritic score of 81%. So there we have it, a list of RPGs that you can finish in 20 hours or under, gradually getting shorter. There are so many I could have included this, but I wanted it to be 15 of my favourites. Do let me know in the comments what are yours. Have you enjoyed this format? Is it of use to you in a world with seemingly so little time? Being able to choose the right experiences can be very valuable indeed. Thank you to our Patreons, our members, all of you that enjoy the content. Share this with a friend if you think they'd enjoy it. And as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!